Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by the suddenly clean-shaven Wes Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our new studio at Lambeau Field. Wes, there's been a bit of a progression here because over our last two episodes, we've gone from the full beard to the goatee, and to now it's all gone. So you want to clue us all in on what's going on here?
What did you get your mom for Mother's Day? What was the gift at the Spofford household for Mama?
We got me and the kids went in together on this whole coffee and chocolate. It's sort of like these international things that are like paired up certain coffees with certain chocolates
cool.
And stuff like that. Yeah.
So for my mother, for Mother's Day, I give her a gift every year. And I don't just do this. I gave her, a nice card and some other things, a candle. But I shave for Mother's Day. That's what I do. Now, I had a little fun last week because my mom, here's the thing. My mom does not like my beard. This is well documented.
Shocker.
She's never liked it. It's gotten better. I've gotten more compliments than criticism over the years, but she's never been a big fan of it. So I told her last week, I'm going to shave. What I didn't tell her, though, initially was I shaved it into a goatee. I technically shaved, but it was a goatee. She actually didn't hate that.
Okay.
I think she actually I have to survey her on this. I think she liked the goatee more than she liked the beard. But be that as it may, it was my mom's birthday on Saturday. Happy birthday, Mom. I love you. And then obviously Mother's Day on Sunday.
Wow, what a weekend.
Yeah, she always gets gets messed with a little bit on having both of those fall in the same weekend. But be that as it may, I shaved for my mother for Mother's Day. The beard will be back, though. I am too lazy to shave on a daily basis, so we will have the beard back soon enough.
Okay, well, we'll see, I guess, when we finish up at the end of the off-season program and then when we return for the start of training camp.
I should go completely clean-shaven and then big old beard.
Yeah, then have the whole thing, no holds barred. All right. Well,
I'm looking forward to you pulling that out, though, for the timestamps, talking about Wes's facial hair. All right, let's talk about the Packers.
Yes, because there was a pretty big piece of news that happened on Friday as we headed into Mother's Day weekend, and that was the Packers deciding to release veteran kicker Brandon McManus. So the roster is down to two kickers, 6th-round draft pick Trey Smack, also Lucas Haversick. So the competition that was talked about when Smack was drafted, various coaches, assistant coaches, and whatnot address that. Not going to be what was anticipated anymore.
No, and as I wrote in our Insider Inbox column for this morning on Tuesday, I was on board with the idea of a kicking competition. I liked it. I felt like the competition was going to bring out the best in everybody there. But as I reflected upon this and marinated on what Green Bay did over the weekend, it makes a lot of sense. And certainly there was a financial component to it. They've already paid out some money to Brandon McManus,
right,
in the form of a roster bonus back in March. They did put the post-June 1st designation on it with his release, so that means they spread out his cap hit over this summer and also going into next year. So that's another aspect you have to consider. But the fact of the matter remains, because I know what fans' reaction can be to these sort of things and how they can be about these things. I hope people can take a minute to appreciate and remember what Brandon McManus did for this team in 2024. I don't know if the Packers make the playoffs in 2024 if Brandon McManus doesn't show up and really solve what had been a nagging kicking competition issue that they had throughout the summer and then obviously led to Braden Narveson being the initial kicker going into the season. McManus righted that ship. Yep. Last year did not go as well. He was 6 of 12 from beyond 40 yards and obviously had some more issues and things going on in the playoffs. Be that as it may, the Packers made the move. They went up and got Trey Smack. They also have a pretty darn good kicker in Lucas Haversick, who's done it at a high level, who's done it in the National Football League, also a part of that competition. So it's not like, Smack's going to go with no competition. That is something I imagine will push both of those guys throughout the summer. But for McManus now, with this decision being made, it allows him to move on with his career, maybe find another opportunity, and the Packers to press forward with these two young kickers.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, kind of, I guess, how this goes, because I think you and I both thought if McManus is still here going into training camp, that this was really going to be a coin flip type of competition.
Yeah, right.
Now I think it's fair to say, I mean, Trey Smack is the front runner. He's the guy the Packers invested a draft pick in. They potentially envision, you're right, a couple of draft picks. Yeah. They envision him potentially being, the next long-term kicker here, and we don't know. We don't know if it'll play out that way or not. But again, it kind of goes back to what I said, right after the draft, where this is the fascinating part about this process, that 15 picks before the Packers took Trey Smack, they could have taken him then in the middle of the 6th round, and they didn't. They had a different priority. They really liked Damani Jackson. They wanted to add more to the cornerback room. That was where the thoughts were. But then as the end of the 6th round rolled around, and then the opportunity was there, and it's entirely possible that opportunity wouldn't have been there if another team, maybe 5 picks after Damani Jackson gets picked, maybe Trey Smack would have been drafted, and then we're not even having this conversation, and we're talking about Brandon McManus still being the front runner to hold on to his job here. So it falls into that category of you just never know what direction things are going to go in this league. Things can change on a dime, and we'll see where Brandon McManus ends up. We'll see what happens between Trey Smack and Lucas Haversick. We kind of got to see both the best and the worst of Haversick during when he was subbing for McManus last year. He makes the 61-yarder, longest field goal in franchise history by 3 yards. Mason Crosby's 58-yarder was the longest until then. Makes a 61-yarder out in Arizona to set a franchise record, but then in the windy conditions in the Meadowlands, couldn't make an extra point. So, right. And Trey Smack is going to have to navigate all of this stuff with the Green Bay weather and all of that to see where his career goes. But I think it'd be pretty cool, and it'd be a heck of a story if Trey Smack is sort of the next Mason Crosby and is here for 10, 12, 14 years.
Yeah, and I actually you had talked about it a little bit last week. And then I was thinking about it over the weekend, too, because I go back to the 2007 competition between Crosby and Dave Rayner. And Rayner was the one-year incumbent, and it went down to the wire. But in some cases, I think everybody could kind of agree that was going to be Mason's job. Ted Thompson had selected him in the 6th round. That's a big spot to take a kicker.
Yeah.
And Mason was coming off a very prodigious college career at Colorado, and everybody knew of his leg strength. Everybody knew of his accuracy. That was going to be an uphill battle for Rayner. So in this regard, and I don't want to compare one kicker to another. We'll see how Trey does. We've never even seen the guy kick live yet. But be that as it may, I just think sometimes you just don't want to overcook the beef Wellington, right? This is the direction Green Bay wanted to go in the draft. They ultimately did settle on Smack. He's who they ended up with after they traded those 2 7th-round picks. And now he proceeds as the Packers kicker. And you still have an insurance policy there with Haversick, but you hope between that and just what Smack put on tape at Florida, the venues that he kicked in the SEC, that he's going to be able to roll with the punches. He certainly has the confidence. And now for the Packers, I feel like in so many ways with this transition now from Rich Bisaccia to Cam Acord, the changes they made with the kickoff return team already and bringing in a Sky Moore who could potentially help you in both areas. This just feels like the turning of the page that needed to happen with special teams. It's a clean slate, and now Acord's going to be able to build this thing up in the way he wants that unit to look.
Yeah, and in some ways, I don't know. I mean, McManus literally had the worst game of his career in the playoffs in Chicago last year. And, regardless of what might have happened in September and October, say if he wins the job and stays here, that a performance like that ends a team's season, it's never going to go away in the mind of the fan base, right? So that's a tough spot for anybody to be in.
One other thing too, Mike, this isn't 2004 anymore, right? We're seeing fewer and fewer of these kickers going into their 40s. Teams just aren't willing to take that chance anymore. I don't know if we'll ever see another Morton Anderson or Gary Anderson or John Carney, these guys that played well into their 40s. McManus is still, by all accounts, if you go back and use that metric 20 years ago, a relatively young kicker at 35.
Yeah.
But with the direction this thing has gone, with fewer of those guys kicking past 40, it's weird that there's been this progression now with more teams skewing young. And I don't know if that goes back to guys making 60-yard field goals and how much they're being called upon to do that now.
Yeah, I think that's really where it is that the expectation is that from 55 yards and in, those kicks need to be made, and you need to be able, or at least have the capability of hitting from between 55 and 60 on a fairly regular basis now, because there are enough kickers out there that can do that. So if you don't have one that can do that, you're sort of playing uphill in the special teams game in the NFL right now, right? So I think that's why there are fewer of the 40-plus-year-old kickers and whatnot, because it's the young guys in their 20s who you get the ball across midfield to the plus 40-yard line. That's a 58-yard field goal. The expectation is if you're indoors, weather is good surface, all that kind of stuff, the expectation is that 60 to 70% of the time that kick's going to be made. Whereas as I just said, the longest field goal in Packers history before last year was 58 yards by Mason Crosby in his long and illustrious tenure here. So yeah, it's another part of the game that's changing.
And with respect to Mace too, I mean, it wasn't inaccuracy that retired him out of this league, right? It was father time, and even though he made that 58-yarder down the stretch there, right, that it kind of doinked it in and was able to get it, it became a question of leg strength, being able to hold up in these conditions. And when you see a guy like Smack, again, we're only watching film, we're only watching his tape from the combine, but this ball just jettisons off his foot. Yeah. I mean, it is remarkable. So when you hear Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur discuss how they felt like he was the best kicker in this draft, it's not hyperbole. I mean, this guy has those type of credentials. Lance Zierlein had a 6th-round grade on him from what I recall. I mean, people thought that this dude was going to be a draftable kicker, and the Packers were able to add him to the fold.
Well, a couple other things I want to get to, but we do need to pay some bills. So first, we'll hear a quick word from our sponsor. SiriusXM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. Welcome back to Packers Unscripted. Wes, yesterday, and by yesterday I mean Monday, on our website, you posted a story, kind of a traditional story you've been doing with regard to the Packers draft class. In this case, it's 6 things to know about the Packers draft class, because there were only 6 guys in the class. I'll let you kind of walk us through some of those, but I think the overarching theme of the story is that with every single one of these Packers draft picks, there's an interesting connection to the Packers franchise in one way or another with each of these guys.
Yeah, and it's just the small world of the NFL, right? I mean, Trey Smack ultimately is the biggest example that the guy's playing lacrosse, and it just so happens that one of his teammates, his dad's Matt Stover, right? And then Stover takes a look at him, works him out 6-8 times, and tells him and his mom and everybody associated with him, this guy can kick in the league. And he wasn't even a kicker, really, at that point. That's just the way that these things work sometimes. It's just so serendipitous. But the story that I probably enjoyed the most, and it was such a small one in terms of the grand scheme of things, but the fact that Chris McClellan, the Packers' 3rd-round pick, defensive tackle out of Mizzou, he hails from Tulsa, just like Josh Jacobs. And when you think of these areas, and certainly there's bigger hotbeds than others. Wisconsin typically, other than maybe some offensive linemen, hasn't been known as a big NFL hotbed. But when you have someone like McClellan, as he said and he talked about with the reporters during rookie minicamp weekend, to have someone like Josh Jacobs to look up to, their high schools. He went to 2 high schools, both of them, McClellan did. Both of them were still about 20 minutes away from where Jacobs went to high school at McLaurin. Yeah. So the fact that he had someone like that to point to when you're thinking about playing in the National Football League, playing college, Division I football, that is one thing. And then for that same individual to be a teammate and someone as one of the first dudes to reach out to you after your NFL team drafts you, you could just tell in his voice and his demeanor just what that meant to him, and obviously they're going to get a chance to know each other a little bit better, obviously now being teammates and whatnot. But I just always enjoy those stories of when the young up-and-comer, high school kid with aspirations was able to follow in the footsteps of one of the guys that he looked up to. Another story I always go back to, I went to Bayport High School here in Swamico, and Alec Ingold, who now is with the Los Angeles Chargers, has played many years now in the NFL.
Yeah.
He eventually went to Wisconsin. Was kind of this diamond in the rough up here, playing a position at fullback that, typically is not known for its longevity in the professional world. And one of the guys he looked up to as a kid coming up at Bayport was Dan Benning. And Dan Benning was a guy that was drafted, I believe played at Wisconsin, but definitely was drafted in the mid-rounds by Tampa Bay. And played a couple years in the league, but what that meant to Alec and how that kind of catapulted him in his own career, those are the fun stories you always talk about, especially this time of year. And yeah, there's in the 6 things. The reason I started doing that is because there were so many interesting anecdotes associated with the draft picks that maybe won't work into a Packers yearbook story or a feature on Packers.com, but you want to make sure that we bring some light to it, because all these guys at the end of the day were chasing dreams, and now suddenly they still have a long way to go, but they're right on the precipice of that.
Yeah. And just to throw a little small world item into this whole thing, back in my newspaper days at the Green Bay Press-Gazette, I covered Dan Benning in the heavyweight high school wrestling state finals in Division I down in Madison at the Kohl Center. So
here's another question for you. So Alec's dad, Pat, would have been the coach then on that team. What is he?
Yep.
The world is so small.
Yes.
So small. Yeah. Unbelievably so.
All right. Well, here's another thing I want to throw at you. First, I'm going to toss out a programming note here, because this week on Thursday will be the release of the NFL schedule. So we need to spend the bulk of our Thursday working on getting all this stuff ready to announce, put all of our content on the website on Thursday night. So we won't be able to have an episode of Packers Unscripted this Thursday. We will come back next Tuesday and talk all about the schedule, probably have, maybe even a little bit longer episode than normal to make up for it, because there will be lots to talk about with the schedule.
We're going to make it up to you now.
But we are waiting to get all that information on Thursday and get it out to everybody. But I'll toss this to you as just a little bit of a preview. Is there anything with regard to the schedule? I mean, we know who the Packers' opponents are, right? Home and away. We've known that since the end of last season. Is there anything with the schedule that is sort of like a preference in your mind that you're when we get our first look at the schedule, you're going to hope to see this?
It's really interesting you say that, because I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of what you want that first month of the season to look like when, hey, maybe Micah Parsons and Tucker Kraft are back, maybe not, maybe, you don't know what their rep counts could look like, that sort of thing, even if they are. So in a lot of worlds, you would hope that you see those divisional rivals a little bit later on. The only thing I don't want to see, because I could see the NFL doing this just based on the rivalry, this budding rivalry between the Packers, the Bears, the rhetoric with Ben Johnson. I just don't want to see them send Green Bay back to Chicago right away. And the main reason for that is you guys waited until week 14 last year to have any Packers-Bears games.
Right.
So if they then front-load Packers-Bears early on, that would annoy me a little bit. If they want to bring that game to Lambeau, even if Micah Parsons isn't back or isn't 100% yet, they want to do that in week 1 or 2, I'm good with it. But if because of how things ended in the wild card round, they decide, hey, we're going to send Green Bay back to Chicago immediately, that would be the one thing that kind of ticks me off a little bit. What I think could be a really cool idea that I've been talking about with some people about this, we heard at the combine, or I should say the owners' meetings, about Jeff Hafley saying, it'd be great if Miami played Green Bay right out of the gate, because he's obviously maybe there's a chance you're not going to get Parsons.
He'd rather not have to deal with Parsons.
But I actually think that'd be a really cool way to begin the season. The Packers have not had a lot of uncommon opponents to start the year. They did it with Jacksonville a number of years ago, but Starting the season against an AFC opponent, particularly Miami, I think the storylines would be there. I think it'd be really cool to hear Jeff Hafley and Matt LaFleur kind of rap about each other.
The whole Malik Willis.
Malik
thing
Willis,
with,
I think, would be really fun.
The
Now,
quarterback.
I don't think the NFL thinks that deep about these things. I think we're getting Dallas and the New York Giants in an opener again for the umpteenth time in the umpteenth years, even though the Giants haven't really been that competitive recently, and Dallas didn't make the playoffs last year. But they like their brands. I'm sure it'll be something with the NFC North right out of the gate.
Well, it looks like, I mean, unless I'm missing something, because of the sort of intentional leaks of certain primetime games and this and that. I mean, we've already heard what the first Sunday night football game is going to be. We've heard what the first Monday night football game is going to be. Obviously, the Packers are not involved in the kickoff opener that's in Seattle, and then there's also the week one. There's going to be the primetime game in Australia between the Rams and the 49ers. So it looks like, as I said, unless I'm missing something, it looks like the Packers will have either like a noon or a 3:25 game in week one, whether it's at
by process of elimination.
Yeah, whether it's at Lambeau Field or elsewhere. Here's the one thing. The first thing I'm gonna look at, and this I guess is partly like me getting older and all the years I've been doing this, because this is completely a selfish thing and has nothing to do with the Packers and competitiveness or whatever. But I'm going to look at what time the game at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles is, because probably my least favorite games to cover are West Coast night games. Mm-hmm. Because now that game against the Rams at SoFi, the difference between that game being at 3:25 Central and being at 7:30 p.m. Central at night is the difference between, our plane getting back and landing at 1 in the morning or getting back and landing at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. So that's purely like a selfish thing. But that being said, with the Rams having gone to the NFC Championship game last year, the Packers obviously perennial playoff contender, and the TV draw that they always are, it would not surprise me in the slightest if Packers against the Rams is in a primetime slot somewhere, whether it's a Thursday night game, a Sunday night, a Monday night, whatever that might be. So I'm probably not going to get my wish there, but that's the first thing I'm going to look at, because I don't like flights that land at 4 or 5 in the morning.
I was going to say, so we will either get on a Friday morning, Monday morning, or Tuesday morning a very cranky Mike Spofford walking around the office. It's really interesting, though, because that's the only West Coast – well, we could see the preseason, but, I mean, that's the only West Coast trip right now for Green Bay. I think otherwise it's what? I mean, the furthest west they would go would be Minnesota? I mean, like –
it might be, yeah.
Maybe. I don't know where it falls on the line. Is New Orleans more west? But, I mean – the Packers don't have a ton of like lengthy road trips this year, but certainly LA is one of the top of the list, regardless of how things shuffle out.
And it's a cool stadium out there.
Very neat stadium.
I'm sure. I mean, we've been there once. I'm sure it would be cool to see it at night. The other time we were there, it was a regular like late afternoon Central Time game. I'm sure it'd be really cool to see it at night. And I know, regardless of what the kickoff time is, when the Packers are back at SoFi Stadium, there are going to be plenty of Packers fans there. There certainly were a couple years ago when the Packers won that game out there. It's a trip to look forward to regardless. I'm sure
we're doing a pep rally too.
Yeah, probably.
I'd be surprised
somewhere downtown LA.
That's the way it's usually been.
Yeah.
I need to provide a little context to that comment I made about the Bears, if I may.
Okay.
The reason I said that, for people who don't know the Packers' schedule and opponents and situation with Lambeau Field inside and out, this is the game where Wisconsin's playing Notre Dame this year. So I would be surprised if Green Bay has a week one home opener the week after the Wisconsin Notre Dame game.
I'm thinking that the Packers are going to get a road game in week one because of the Wisconsin Notre Dame game on Labor Day weekend.
And just again, through this process of elimination that we're working through here 48 hours before the schedule gets released, I would just surmise that the most likely thing would be for Green Bay to open against the NFC North. I think it would be too easy. I think it'd be lazy for the NFL to schedule Chicago right off the bat again because, well, that's convenient. I would rather see maybe, hey, week 2, if Chicago wants to come to Lambeau, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Or even later in the season. But to do those 2 games like they did, where everything was so close and bunched up at the end of last season.
Yeah, and then you ended up having the playoff game. So essentially, the Packers and Bears played each other 3 times in a span of whatever it was, 5 or 6 weeks or something like that.
That's just not. I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
I get it. You want to have divisional games the way the league's been scheduling. You want to have them early, you want to have them late, but it also leads to some really annoying kind of manifestations of this whole thing.
Yeah, so. I'm with you there. But we just got to wait now because at some point on Thursday, we're going to get all the schedule information. We're going to get it all prepped for the website, all sorts of content, as well as some special content that we're looking forward to releasing.
Oh, dude, I'm so pumped. Like, again, we can't say too much. I don't want to get in trouble at all, but I used to dread schedule release week. I don't think I've ever been more excited than this year. I think what our digital and social media department cooked up is just brilliant. I think it's creative. I love watching the people outside these doors. They put our ugly mugs on the show and our voices, and I do not have a radio voice. They put us all out here on our platforms. There are so many amazing human beings that make this operation tick that are so much more talented than I am. And to see them all spread their wings in just the synergy, the unity, the communication, the teamwork between them, that's the best part of it. It doesn't matter what you do, right? I could be like my parents working at the paper mill. When you have a great team around you and being able to see them shine, I'm really geeked for this. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun. It's gonna be a fun day on Thursday. We hope that what everybody sees on Thursday night on the website is going to be fun and entertaining for them. But with that, we're going to call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team, everything with the schedule release on Thursday. As I said, no second episode of Unscripted this week, but we'll be back next week to talk all about the schedule when we have all of those details. So for Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.